Welcome, everyone. My name is Eric Seidman. I work for the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners. I'm their crop specialist. And I remember a long time ago when I first built my hoop house that I thought we had everything solved. Here was a structure that was going to keep the leaves dry all the time. It was small. I could manage fertility like I used to manage it in a garden. I could manage the temperature. I could manage the light. I could manage the water. And then it worked great for about a year, and then all of a sudden I realized it got too hot some days, it got too cold other days, some days it was too wet for one reason or another, and then the fertility started to get out of whack, and you know, I had control of the environment, but it was so small that I could just put it out of whack myself sometimes. And in reality, I actually didn't know exactly what was in whack. And so this came an idea for us. Let's talk about the environment and how we have the control of it. What do we do with that control? How do we manage it so it's really good for the plants? And it worked out very well. About 4 years ago, I met Adam. He came down to the New England Vegetable and Fruit Conference that's held in Manchester, New Hampshire every other year. And then actually this year, he stayed at my house. My wife, Becky, invited him to speak in New Hampshire for a talk very much like this one. Adam is the expert. Not only just because he's away, but this is what he does. He helps people out in Michigan, works for Michigan State as their outreach specialist, and works with hoop house people, helping them manage their environment. So it's my real pleasure to introduce Adam to you. He's going to be our first speaker. After Adam, we're going to go down to the ground. Bruce Hoskins from Maine runs our soil lab here. He did a terrific job at our Farmer to Farmer conference last fall on the difference of managing the soil in a hoop house and managing it out on the field. There's some real differences there. That's going to be our morning. In the afternoon, Adam's going to come back and talk about record keeping, something I have almost no interest in. Thanks. And then we're going to finish up the day with probably my favorite part, and it should be yours too. This is when all of those things that you thought were going to get covered today and didn't, that's going to be your opportunity. We're going to finish up the day with a discussion period where you could ask very specific questions if you need to for something that you didn't get quite right, or you could bring up a whole issue that wasn't covered. We're going to have a panel here of some people who've been doing hoop house growing for years, and Adam's going to be on that panel too, and I'll facilitate it. So, Abby had one announcement for you. She is so smart. On the back of your schedule is your evaluation. Please fill them out so we have an idea of how well we're doing and what we're going to do next year. And that's it. Adam, it's all yours.
Can everyone hear me all right? Yes. In the back? Sounds good? All right, so I'm going to use this microphone. I don't usually use them, but since we're kind of long and skinny to keep me from yelling in the faces of all the people in front so that we can hear in the back, I think we're going to go with that. So if at any time you can't hear me or this goes black or something comes up that shouldn't be up there or something, just holler and raise your hand, especially if I'm facing this way. So start out and say, first of all, thank you for having me here. This is the first time I've been to Maine. I hope you guys can understand both my West Coast and Southern accents here. So we'll give a holler again if anything comes up, and hopefully we can answer questions throughout the day. I'm good to answer questions kind of as we go through, or if we want to hold off, or in between sessions or whatever. Anything works for me. So again, thanks for having me here. We're going to start out with a few questions first, just so I kind of get an idea of where we're at, where you guys are at. So who's farming in tunnels? All right. Who's not farming in tunnels but interested in farming in them? It's about split half and half there, it looks like. Who's growing in them just warm season, kind of season extension, tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, basil, that kind of stuff. Who's growing 10 months out of the year, or growing and harvesting, why don't we say? How about year-round, 12 months? All right, of those of you who were kind of in that 6 to 10 month period, which of you are interested in doing kind of longer or going into that 10 to 12 months? So it looks like just about, from that very scientific survey there, that just about everyone who is doing that 6 to 6 or 8 or 10 is interested in kind of going a little bit longer. So it sounds like we're all in the right place then today. So real quick, I guess some of my background, so you don't think I'm just some Yahoo, or maybe you will think I'm just some Yahoo up here talking. I was at Michigan State when the student farm got started there. So the student farm is now a 15-acre certified organic farm with a farmer training program, outreach component, which is what I do. We've got 3 markets. We've got a 48-week CSA that's been going since 2003, an on-campus farm stand, and some sales into the dorm. So we kind of have a wholesale model, a CSA model, and a farm stand model, so the students coming through can kind of learn all of those. We have some undergraduate outreach as well. We've got chickens and bees and pigs as well. And then we just added 4 acres of dry bean that's in transition. So that's kind of my MSU responsibilities. I work with farmers. I'm only at the student farm maybe 1 day a week. Work with farmers around the country and looking basically at how to increase production, not just production, but increase our economic viability as small and mid-sized farmers as well. And then, which the economic part is what I really like to talk about. So there'll be some numbers after lunch if that's all right. And then we also farm at home, so we're a much smaller farm there. We've been selling since fall of 2008. This is a picture of one of our tunnels at home. It's a 34 by 96, and then next weekend we're building a 26 by 48 movable that's half put together. The bows are put together now. So there we're just about 2 acres. We have about an acre to acre and a half in production. We're adding a little bit more space this year, so we might be somewhere around 2 acres in production this year. We sell at a farmer's market in town, and then we do some online sales as well, where people come and pick up at the market, but they put their sales in earlier. So kind of like to say that I've got both the university side and like the practical side too. But that if anyone from the university is here, that doesn't mean the university is not practical, right? It just means we're really good at looking at things differently. So, all right, so let's hop into this. We're not really going to talk about soils again because we've got that coming up next. But I'll talk a little bit about just the kind of shoot zone management and a little bit about structures as well. So I always like to get in my head kind of, before we go into where we're going, kind of where we want to be, right? So this is kind of our end goal, a covered hoop house with some stuff growing in it, right? So a lot of the pictures that you'll see here are, most of the tunnels are 30 by 96. That's pretty standard for what we do. Some of us do 34s to just kind of see what was going on, try something different, get a little bit more production space. And we've got a couple that are 144 long, but for the most part, we're working 30 by 96s. Right, so again, here's another picture, just kind of thinking about where we're going. We'll talk about this. You guys do a lot of the internal covering also. We've got a couple different ways that we do it and different reasons for why we do it these different ways. So here's one, and again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. So for what we're going to cover in the next hour, right, is we're kind of being ambitious a little bit, I think. But we're going to talk a little about siting and sizing tunnels, just to kind of get everyone up to speed. I know a lot of you already have some, but there are an equal amount that are really interested in them. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but we will talk some. Thinking about orientation, temperature and humidity control, our bed layout or our design. A lot of the pictures you'll see, our beds go the short distance. We do them both ways. There's a reason again that we do them both ways. And it's not just because we're involved in the university and we like to do things lots of ways so that we don't have to make any, this is the way to do it decisions. Talk some about irrigation, different options for us, and then that kind of internal covering. Like I said, I tend to talk pretty fast and go through stuff pretty quickly. That this is being videotaped and it's going to go up, I think, on YouTube. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So if I'm not a very good person in the audience to write and listen at the same time. That's like too much going on. So if you don't get stuff written down, it'll be up and available. All right. So siting and sizing. Right. So here's a really good picture. This is on December 21st. We've got just a little bit of shadow on that second one. So that direction would be south. So these are oriented east-west. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then going north from each other. So the pretty general rule of thumb, well, 2 rules of thumb. One is, most people I know, I would say 99% of them that have one tunnel, add on. So anyone here have a tunnel and think, I hate this thing, I don't want anything to do with it, and I never want to add anything So the answer actually is not the answer I was hoping for. So when you start thinking about where you're going to put these, don't think like, oh, I'm going to put this one here and that's going to be great, because chances are you're going to want to add more onto it. So start kind of thinking ahead of time. And then the general rule of thumb, if you're going north from each other, is that you do twice the height apart. So this one on the left is actually 10.5 feet tall, and there's 20 feet between these tunnels. So you can see, on the longest day, shortest day, longest shadow, you get a little bit of that shade. And we don't have any supplemental heat or supplemental light in these, so in the winter, if we're in the shade from another tunnel, another structure, tree line, barn, whatever, no light means no heat. No heat means no crops to harvest. No crops to harvest means no money to bring into the farm. No money to bring into the farm means we might be looking for a job somewhere else. So, again, so we're trying to thinking, early on, how are we going to space this out? Where is future expansion going to happen? And then this space is now, at this site, this is at the student farm, is getting used also. So we've got some strawberries that are getting the production in there, which is kind of nice. It gives them a little bit of a little buffer zone, a little bit warmer microclimate in there. But we've only been doing that for a year, so not sure how it's going to do. So here, again, is kind of a good, a more visual of it, right? So if we're living in this house and we're like, I'm going to stick my other tunnel right here because, I looked in the summer and there was no shade. Well, come winter, we're going to be in the shade. So, just thinking about that. All right, so here's a kind of better picture of the student farm this winter. This was in January, kind of going back there. So you can see there's 4 on this side of the road. Should probably say, so the student farm, we've got 8 tunnels. One of them is for a composting research project, and that was more affordable than building something. So the 7 tunnels that are in production, there's about 17,000 square feet of unheated space there. And then there's other heated space where we do our transplants and stuff as well. All right, so real quick about width. So, pretty standard widths are, 20, 26, 30, 34, 35, depending on the manufacturer. The way I always think about it when we work with farmers and they say, how do I figure out, do I go wider, do I go longer? We'll talk about length in a minute. I always like to go wider. And the reason is that no matter how wide you are, you kind of have this 2 feet of marginal growing space on the edge, right? And so it's not that you can't grow there. Clearly you can. But it's wettest, coldest, darkest, all through the winter. So if you're 20 wide and you have 2 feet on each side, right, that's 4 out of 20. That's 20% of your growing space that is sort of marginal, right? But if you go 30 wide or 34 or 35 wide, you still only have that 2 feet. So there's less of your less of your production space that's marginal space. We'll talk a little bit about what we've done with that, as well as going wider, and another thing that a lot of the farmers by us are doing, and I think farmers out here are doing as well, with that marginal space. Right, so length then for us, I'm guessing your bow spacing here is pretty much 4 feet also. Is that a safe guess? See? Yeah? Okay, I'm seeing some yeses. So, anyone doing 6-foot spacing? Do you have bigger ground posts? Like 2.5, 2 3/4? And trusses, okay. So, seems like, as you go wider, you clearly have, or as you go along, more space between the bows, you clearly have more infrastructure is needed to support the weight of the snow and wind. So again, they tend to be 4, can be 6, but those lengths tend to be for us 24, 48, 72, 96, 144. Then you can get up to 200s, but that's a big sheet of, not that you shouldn't do that, that's a big sheet of plastic to just make sure it's calm on that day when you're putting it on. And again, what we say is if you can say a 20 by 96 is really similar to a 30 by 48 as far as square footage goes. So if you're kind of at that borderline of I have X amount of money to spend and I can do those 2 structures, what we tend to say is it's nice to do that 30 by 48 because you get that width early on, and then 5, 6 years down, 4, 5, 6 years when you change that poly out, what we've seen farmers do is go ahead and just take their end wall off, not just take their end wall off, but take that end wall off, buy more bows, another maybe 48 feet, build those on, and then go ahead and put that same end wall on, and then when they're buying that new sheet of plastic, they would buy a 100-foot sheet instead of a 50-foot sheet. So you can kind of, you can always add on length. Your width they make conversion, some companies make conversion kits to make them like from a 20 to a 30, but they're really awkward, and so we usually just say, you know, think about that wider rather than longer early on. So this is kind of the other thing that some people are doing. Is anyone raising up their houses 2 feet, like using 6-foot ground posts, not spacing, but yeah, 6-foot ground posts instead of 4, just a couple, right? Couple, and are you guys doing that so that your walkways can be on the edge? You're on a hill, okay. I was looking out today, you know, Mark, where I was staying, you know, their hills, their fields are like that. I was like, that's like a mountain in Michigan, you know. So other people, are you doing it so that you can pop the aisles on the edge? Is that the main part? Yeah, all right. So here's the top picture of the same house next to each other. One is just 2 feet, has 2 feet, it's raised up 2 feet. So you can see Sue here. It's kind of deceiving because she's really short. But you know, most of us, when we walk down the edge, we bash our head over and over and over going down the side. But by raising it up, what we've been able to do is, you know, with 1 foot in, we're about 7-foot clearance. So remember that 2-foot marginal space has now become a place where we can put our walkways. And our walkways that were in the middle were where it's the warmest, nicest, best place to grow, and that kind of extended season has now become a place where we can actually grow instead of walking. And for us, you know, I think across most companies, it ends up being somewhere between $10 and $15 per ground post to do that. So I like easy math, so if we say it's $10 and there's 50 ground posts, it's about $500 extra dollars. And if we say we suddenly got a lot more usable space, you're making up that $500. We'll talk about that in the economic stuff. It's fairly easy. I think it's worth the investment. All right, I always like to throw this one in. So, good site prep or bad site prep? Notice the burn pile still smoking. This is a nice one to show up to. This is a research project we were doing, and you know, we talked for like 3 months about prepping that site and getting, you know, especially the grasses out and perennials out, and we showed up, and this was what we ended up with. But you know, he weeded a lot of quackgrass that first year, but it actually ended up being a really nice site. But it's a real classic example of what not to do for your site prep. All right, so orientation. So what we usually like to say is above 40 degrees north latitude, which is northern Ohio-ish. We really like to go east-west for year-round production. For summer production only, or season extension production of warm season crops, we've got enough light. It doesn't matter. We can be north-south, we can be east-west. I've put the kind of the asterisks here of we work with a lot of farmers who position, because of outbuildings, because of the shape of their property, because of other things, that have done houses north-south, and they can grow year-round. It's not like a no way, you can't do it, not going to happen type thing. But, you know, to kind of, if we think about optimizing, we're trying to get as much light into that tunnel as possible, right? So what we want to do is kind of position that tunnel in a way that gets the most light in. More light equals more heat equals a little bit more ability to grow, more time to harvest, those kinds of things. A little bit of buffer zone maybe to not get things, if we don't get things in right when we want to in the fall, then we have a couple more days or a week or so to be able to put those in.
Can you repeat the beginning of that? Which direction did you put them in?
East-west is our length. So we usually do a little demonstration. So those of you who I think were in New England a couple of years ago probably have seen this, but I don't recognize a lot of you. So okay, 2 volunteers to come up, and we'll, I need someone does anyone have yellow on that feels like be in the sunshine? Who's bright and smiling today? Or wants to just be the sunshine? Don't all rush up at once, all right. And then we need someone who wants to be the hoop house. Anyone wearing green? You're in the front row, John. That's what you see what you get for getting in the front row? All right, so someone humor me and tell me which way north is. That way. Oh, perfect. All right, so let's come over here. Let's move this a little. All right. So north is that way. All right, so that means the sun is always south of us, right? So come on over here, sun. And sun rises in the east or the west. East, west, and I checked. So this way, right? So let's position the hoop house north-south, right? So what happens, and again, in the summer there's no difference. It's not no difference, but we have enough light that we're not that concerned about it. But in the winter, we're really low on the horizon, right? We have really short days. So, and the sun is really far away from us. So we have all those things working against us, right? So if we're positioned this way, we have a vertical end wall right here, right? So what we know is the more light hits at 90 degrees, hits the surface at 90 degrees, the more light passes through it, right? We get reflection bouncing off, and we get refraction bending through, but we're trying to get as close to 90 as we can. So what we have here is a more or less vertical end wall. So the sun comes out, comes across, right? What we have is a vertical wall, lots of reflection, refraction, not much light coming in, and if we're 96 feet long, we're trying to get that light to come all the way down, 100 feet basically. So it's a long way to travel, it's not a lot of light coming through, and it's a small area that it's coming through at. But if we turn this way, right, what we have is whether we're quanted or Gothic, we've got this angle here, right, we're not at 90 again because it's really low in the horizon, but we're closer, we're getting more light passing through with this angle of the hoop house here, high tunnel. Right, so what we have then is the sun coming out, and all day long it's passing along this length of the house, right? It's getting lots of light in through here, and if we're 30 or 35, even if we're 35 wide, that's 1/3 the distance that we're trying to get that light to come across instead of 100 feet. So we're getting lots of light in, less reflection and refraction, and less distance that we're trying to get that light to pass or to travel down. So, so does that make sense? Those are some of the reasons why we do it east-west. Again, we work with farmers who do it north-south, and it works. It's not that it doesn't work, it's just more about trying to optimize stuff.
So how critical is the early morning and late afternoon light? And if you can't have one, which is the better one to have?
I personally like to think about getting morning light on, mostly because we're coming out of the so I should repeat the question. The question was thinking about if you had to choose morning or late, early morning or late afternoon light, which one would you kind of choose? And I would say that I would choose morning light, mostly because if we're thinking about winter production, we're coming out, it's really cold, right? It's been cold, and if we can get morning light on there, it's going to start to heat that space up a little bit faster than, if we don't get the light till say 11 instead of 9. So we've got that time in the morning where we're trying to, coming out of the coldest period, we're really trying to get that heated up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but how about the last 2 hours? Like how much do you lose by not having that?
Again, if you had to, so how much do you lose by not having it in the last 2 hours? I think what I would do is, instead of, there's one way to think about it. I think what I would think about is, that just means that you need to cover. So if we're having that internal cover on or off, that you would just be out there covering earlier so you might be out there to cover at 3 instead of at 5 or something like that. So or 2:30 instead of 4:30 when it's really dark. So you're trying to trap that heat in. And that's kind of how it is in our house. We get more morning, and then our neighbor's property has a big tree line, and we get afternoon. In the winter, in the summer, we're getting more, and we're getting enough. But in the afternoon, we're getting less than we do in the morning because of that tree line. So we do end up going out there a little earlier to cover than if we were just in an open field. So, I thought you were going to ask. We usually get 1 or 2 people that ask it. Now, should I go true north or should I go magnetic north? I thought that's where you were going. So, all right. So here's kind of. What's that? If you are really adamant about that, then you can go for it. So here's just a little way. We'll come back to this afternoon when we talk about cropping and crop timing. But here's kind of what's happening with light outside throughout the year. So we'll get 3 slides with groups of 4 months. Right, so just looking at, you guys are pretty much similar to us. There's a couple times in the year where you're not, where you're more like what northern Michigan is. We're kind of, where we're at is right here, so Detroit's down this way. So we're kind of right in the middle, south central part of the Lower Peninsula. Right, so what we know, so these numbers on here are measured in moles per meter squared per day, which means something, but it's not that important to think about. But what's really important to think about is that we know that 10 moles per meter squared per day is kind of the minimum needed for plant growth, right? So again, it could be 10 whatever you want to call them, but 10 is the important part of it. Right? So in January we can see, and again this is outdoor, so we got to think about not only is it outdoor, but we're getting light passing through a surface, so we're decreasing that light already. Again, so in January, February, you can start to see it increases some. We're up to 20, 25. Again, March, we're a little bit higher up, you know, in that 25 to 30, 20 to 30, depending on where we're at. You know, April, we start really going. You know, May, this is kind of the where I like to think about it, where it really starts to make sense to me with light, is that, right, if we look in June, you guys are here, Miami's here, right? You've got the same amount of light that they do in the summer. Does that make any sense, or did I just kind of move these around? So why does that make sense? What's happening with light in the summer here and in Michigan compared to what's happening year-round down there?
Longer days.
Longer days, right? So light is a combination, right? It's not just intensity, it's intensity and day length. So what happens is they're a lot more intense than we are, clearly. But you know, in the summer when we've got those 15-hour days, they're close to the equator, they're still more in that kind of, you know, 12, 13-hour days. So while they're more intense, we have longer days, so we can get the same amount of light. And so, and what we kind of see, right, is if we flip through them again really quickly, right, is we've got in these colder months, right, our lines tend to go east to west. Right? But then as we switch over, you can see they kind of start changing, and then they're more north-south. And then there's California, and we can just with that, right? So, right, and then if we look going into the fall, right, we start seeing October, we're down again at this kind of 15 to 25. So if we said we lost half of that light coming through, that would be more like 7.5 to, you know, 12.5. So those of you who do grow in the winter, kind of what's your latest planting date? Kind of spinach is usually the last thing that we put in the tunnels, so is kind of middle of October, early to middle of October 1st to October 15th, kind of the last planting date where you guys can put stuff in and get it to grow large enough to harvest. Seeing heads not good, that's what I was hoping for. Right, so what happens is we can start to see that a lot of that light is decreasing. Now if we put some heat in there, that changes a lot of, you know, the equation completely. So we're talking about unheated houses. What starts to happen is we see in October, right? And then if we flip back, right? When do you start planting? February 1 to February 15. Is that kind of the next kind of coming out of spring? Seeing lots of head-downs again, right? So again, right, January, we put stuff in. We don't have, in an unheated space, we've got cold temperatures and low light, right? And so February, we start seeing those light again starts to become available. So that's kind of our, we'll talk a lot about that this afternoon also, but those are kind of the critical periods, right? So temperature and humidity, right? So that's really what we're managing, right? We don't have supplemental heat in these. What do we get in the winter? Those of you who don't vent, or that don't have, maybe vent less in the winter, is it really dry in there or really wet in there?
Wet.
Really wet. So we start thinking about plant health again, so kind of optimizing what's going on is what happens if we get really nice, you know, we'll say you guys are from the same place, so really nice 55 degrees during the winter inside the tunnel in really humid conditions. Condensation, right, disease, right? So what we're asking for, you know, that 55 to 65 degrees, 100% humidity, lots of disease pressure there. So, and really low airflow. So what we're trying to do is put a couple things in and manage them in a way that can decrease that humidity, keep us from getting these huge temperature swings, right? So one thing we might think about is like, oh, it's 70, 75 in there during the day. That'll be great. But what ends up happening is we then, at night, underneath that cover, you know, it might be somewhere between 12 and 15 degrees. So what happens then is you get this huge swing, which plants aren't really happy about, right? So we actually manage our venting so that we keep the temperature, you know, we're venting at like 50-ish degrees, 45, 50 degrees in the winter. But we're not looking, we are getting a little bit of growth. We're not looking to put on tons of growth in the winter, right? We're trying to manage it in those big, you know, I'd rather have this 40-degree differences, 15 to 55, say, instead of 15 to 75. So what we kind of have done is started, right, when everyone started doing hoop houses or high tunnels, I kind of use those terms interchangeably. is we said we didn't want to be greenhouses, right? So just like everything is, you don't want to be this, so we all the way as far over as we can get. And now what we started to do is say like, you know, those greenhouse people, maybe they're not so bad, they've got some good ideas. Let's kind of pick and choose from what they have if it's going to help us manage and it's going to be an economically viable option, right? So things like putting on a ridge vent can move a lot of air, but if it costs you $3,500 to do it, well, you know, that's a good chunk of another tunnel potentially. So I would rather see that money go towards another tunnel. But things like these end vents we started to do on a thermostat. And so these are a 51-inch square, right? So they're on a thermostat, they can open and close, they don't have to be automated. But that's something that really helps us in the winter. Well, it helps us all year round, but it really helps us in the winter to manage that humidity, right? We can drop that thermostat, right? Like right now at home, it's set at 50, so and that's where it's been all winter. So it's venting when it gets up to 50 in there and keeping that temperature low, and then they'll go ahead and close. So what you don't have is running in and out to open and close and open and close and open and close. Yep.
Where are you putting that? Is it down low?
We actually have it up higher. We have it because we have that cover. So the question is, where do we put the thermostat? So because we have that internal cover in there, we actually have it up higher. It's facing north, right? We don't want it to face south because it's getting that sun. It's going to skew that. So we have facing north, and then we have a piece of plywood or extra plywood or something right there that blocks the sun from hitting it. Yeah, exactly.
So you keep the temperatures down low or close to the fence lower than 50 degrees then
Right, right. So there's all, again, with that passive cooling, there's a lag time, right? They might open at 50, but it's not like a fan kicks on and pulls that air out or anything like that. So there's clearly this lag time that it keeps to go up, continuing up before it drops back down. Right. So, but what those take, right, is electricity. So if you've got to weigh that into your economic cost too, if you're, you know, 200 feet from the house and you can trench it and drop it in and you can do it for relatively inexpensively. But if you're 1,000 feet from the house or from your power source, well, it costs a lot of money to run wire 1,000 feet, right? So, so we do work also with farmers and in the student farm too. We have some that are more like this style, right? So who's got kind of the butterfly style vents? And yeah, some hands going up, right? So those aren't on a thermostat. They've just got a little pull cord in there. You can see kind of right here, right? It's just a piece of conduit that's screwed into the outside frame, and it just hinges, right? It just pivots through there. And that works really, really well. I definitely will not say you need to get electric to your house and have a thermostatically controlled shutter. But that's one of the options that's out there. Clearly this works. It works really well, and there's just more management involved. So at home, my wife and I both have off-farm jobs. So for us, we went with the thermostat because, you know, in the winter, it's all right, it might stay closed or it might vent a little bit, but this time of the year is really critical for us to have it automated, having off-farm jobs, because, you know, we leave in the morning at 6, it's dark, and it's, you know, 15 degrees, but like 2 days ago, you know, we got the weather you had yesterday 2 days ago, and Eric was just saying you set a record. You know, we were 2 degrees away from a record. We hit 68. I was on campus all day long, and it's like, if I didn't have those thermostats, I'd either go home and open them, and then I'd get, you know, what do you buy? Are you here? We pay you to be here. Or, you know, we would just have to sit there and hope that stuff didn't overheat, and then stuff's going to start to bolt and all that. So there are options. It's clearly, you don't have to have a thermostatically controlled one, but that option is out there. Right, roll-up sides. We tend to have roll-ups on all of our houses. Right, again, it's passive venting, so, you know, they're rolling up around the pipe. And so that's another venting, you know, mechanism. What we usually do is open the vents first, or the, you know, the butterfly vents first, and then if those aren't cooling enough, we'll open the door. If that's not cooling enough, then we'll go for the roll-up side. It's kind of a progression. And we don't always roll them all the way up, right? There's days where we roll them part of the way up, or there's days where it's not windy. We clearly don't want to do this on a really windy day, but we'll roll up just the south side of it sometimes, just to get and leave the north side down. Just, especially this time of year when it's kind of, when you got those days where it's like 40, 45, but sunny and it's heating up in there. And what we'll do is open these vents and open up this side, and what you get is kind of air coming in from the sides and then moving out of the ends. So there's kind of, you can do all this multi-stage cooling without even having it automated, just by the steps that you go through to open these up and how far you open and close them up. Right. So here's a close-up of kind of a different material we've been using lately. Oh, yeah, question?
Yeah, did I see a knee wall of polycarbonate there to keep cold from coming over the crops?
So the idea was that this is the first tunnel we built in '99, and we didn't have very much money. Not that we're rolling in it now, but we didn't have very much money to do anything on. So we put 2x4s there, and then realized that that clearly wasn't probably strong enough. So we went ahead, and it's more to keep things from. It's one to give a little bit of support. It's more to keep things from crawling in, rodents, that kind of stuff, rabbits underneath there. So we'll look in a second about a different way to keep air from coming in with using drop downs, which we've kind of also been not moving towards, but that we've been using. That's a really good question. Okay, so it's this woven material. Is anyone using this stuff? It's like an 8-year, I think it's either 10 or 12 mil. It's like tarp, or like, if you know what ripstop is, it's kind of the same thing. We've been using this for the roll-up sides, just for 2 reasons. One is those are going up and down. They're taking more of a beating than the regular 6 mil that's just on top. So that up and down tends to wear them out faster. So we've been switching for that. And then the other reason is in the winter, right, we seal down the ends of it with wiggle wire or a channel lock of some kind. And with this stuff, you can put that wiggle wire or channel lock in, and then when you pop it out in the spring, it's thick enough and durable enough that it doesn't make a lot of tears in it. Where our houses where we've got the 6 mil that just comes all the way down, then we go ahead and we still do it, but it just ends up getting eaten up and chewed up over time on those ends where we lock it in place. Do you have a question, Jack?
No, I was just going to ask about thermostat leak control.
Yeah, so we're getting to that next. Yep. So that's one option. And then I didn't have a picture of it, but that was what John just asked. This is from our house at home. And the main reason we went with that is we have thermostatically controlled roll-ups also. So there's a couple different ways to do them, but we have a tube motor. So it's just a motor that's about that long on each side, and then it comes in and it's just a little computer that runs it. We can set the temperature. And the same reason we did that is the same thing that because we have off-farm jobs, that not being there and having it a little bit more automated has made sense for us. It's about $1,800 to do those. For the materials, that doesn't include the wire, so I would say for $2,000 you can do that. And for us, that means the difference between having a crop and not having a crop. And again, I think it just becomes an economic decision of if you're there and you're able to get out and you can roll it up and roll it down, it might not be the best use of your time or the best use of your funds. You might use those otherwise, but if it means having a crop, not having a crop, or if you're kind of on a larger farm where you have something somewhere, like your tunnels might be somewhere else or your fields might be somewhere else. We work with some farmers now who have that situation where they're on farm all the time, but if they're tilling or planting or transplanting or plowing or doing something over here, the last thing they want to do when it gets warm is get off the tractor or drive the tractor or stop what they're doing, go roll it up, come back, then the sun goes down or the clouds come in and they've got to go back and close it down. So there's some that have made that decision more for efficiency and less management of the tunnel. The other thing I really like about it is, on this one, Advancing Alternatives makes this one out of Pennsylvania, but most of the greenhouse companies carry it. That on the computer, you can not only set the time or the temperature that you want it to open and close at or to vent at, you can also set how long it runs, and then you can also set how long it takes until it reads another temperature, takes another temperature reading. So for us, it takes about 30 seconds to go from all the way closed to all the way open. So what we have is it's set to run 10 seconds, and then it waits 2 minutes to take another reading. So what happens is it opens about a third of the way, sits there, reads another temperature. If it's good, where it's at, then it stays where it is. If it's not, it goes up. If it's not cool enough, it goes up. If it's too warm again or warm enough, it'll drop back down. So what you get is this kind of multi-stage cooling throughout the day of going up and down, and when it's tied in with the vents, you got those going on as well. So it's more upfront cost, it's more money, it's a little bit of electricity. I would say it's about no more than $150 total for the year in electricity. but it's less management. So, and again, there's lots of options. It's just a matter of weighing, you know, what is your situation, what's your farm looking like, and how much do you want to spend. And again, you don't have to do all these stuff up front. You can do all these things up front. You can, we've done this, you know, you build a house, you know you might want to put in shutters, but you don't have the upfront cash to do it right now. So you just frame it out so that you've got a shutter spot and you put a butterfly one in there. And the butterfly one might be good for the rest of the life of that structure, or the rest of your life of your farm. But if you want to, down the road, you've got the option to pop that out and put in a thermostatically controlled shutter. You can add automatic roll-up sides later on. You can add automatic drop-down sides later on. You can add these things in. It's not like you got to do it all the way up front, or you don't get to do it. Is there a question? Yeah.
Yeah, I bought that weed, okay? Bought from Berkeley. They were supposed to sell me 2 of them. That weed one was supposed to be the underside one, and then there's another one that goes on top of that. Well, guess what happened? They told me, oh, you can use that on the outer layer, because they couldn't get me the outer layer. They didn't want to buy it from another distributor in the south. So when I used it, I looked up there the other day, and now the ice, even though I had the heat on trying to melt what was on top, the ice must have get under that weed cover. And it's flaking off now. It's supposed to have a 6-year guarantee.
So you're using that on the top of your
I'm using
tongue,
it all the way down. They told me this is the cover to use. You can use that on the top, and I used it, and now because this winter was down below 0 where I live, it turned around and the water must have got underneath it and popped.
Well, that's a good thing. I don't know anyone who, I've heard some, I've seen them at trade shows where they're saying put that on top. I haven't met any farmers that are using it for the whole thing, just for the side. So that's a really good lesson learned. All right. All right, so drop downs are another option, right? So the idea here is that you can, instead of coming from down up, right, you're starting at this kind of hip board and dropping it down. So here's kind of another picture of it from outside, right? It's got this crank on the end. There's a couple different styles that work like this. But the idea is that you don't have cold air rushing in right at the plant, right? It comes in above, kind of mixes with the warm air that's in there, and then falls down onto the plants. So I think that that's something, we have both roll-ups and drop-downs. We haven't had the drop-downs for as long as the roll-ups. I think they both work. I think it's that might be one of the things that's on paper that it's like, this makes really a lot of sense to have this break where the air is coming in and mixing. I don't see any production differences. Something that is really nice though that we do see is on days like yesterday where it was warm and you might be venting and it was so windy here that if you roll those up, those plants just get whipped all around. So if you've got it where you're dropping it down, it's coming in and it's not going to whip those plants around as much.
Your plastics on the inside of your hoops, though, your bows, how in the world in the wintertime, you would think that snow would just be pushing that plastic right in, unless I'm...
So yeah, it's kind of this style is kind of a weird thing. So the plastic here is on the inside of these, but the bows, right, the plastic's under the bows on top. This is like these pieces going down are like the guide wires, like, you know, on the roll-ups where they've got the, like the webbing that either goes zigzag or goes vertical. But this screws into the hip board and screws into the baseboard, and that just is kind of a guide for the drop down. So it's not pushing, I mean, it's pushing on that poly, but the poly here on top is on the outside of the roll.
I'm more concerned about here in Maine with a heavy snow. In Michigan, you have snow too.
Yeah.
With a heavy snow load, well, I would think you'd have a lot of side pressure pushing that plastic right into the interior without the side bows giving you support.
Right, so maybe I got this right. So there are bows, it's kind of wedged between. So the bow comes, like the hoop bow comes down, and then the drop down is here, and then there's the outer guide piece. So it's kind of sandwiched. Yeah, it's kind of.
Okay.
Yeah, so here's the inner bow, which is the bows that are forming the hoop, and then there's these guide ones. So that I would agree that if you didn't have that inside one, it would just push it. But yeah, so it's kind of wedged between those. So the only thing that I don't really like about these is that in the summer, there's not a design for them. They more accordion down, they don't roll around a bar. So what happens is, this time of year, in the fall, when they're going up and down, it's fine. But in the summer, when roll-ups basically, they open up and stay up for what, like 3 days in the summer when it's really warm. And for that time where your house is just open, that these ones just kind of lay on the ground. And for us in Michigan, we're pretty constant. We don't have like a wet and dry season. We're pretty constant at 3 to 3.5 inches of precipitation per month all year long. So we get rains, and I think you guys are probably similar. You get June, July, August rains, where that's just laying on the ground. It's just like a place for water to collect on top. So I think the management piece of it is if you let water collect on there, you're going to get algae growth, and it's going to turn green or pink or whatever growth you're getting on there. So it might be something to come out and after rains, crank it up, kind of if you can let it dry out a little bit, at least get that standing water off of it. Because again, it's like an accordion, and it's kind of got a bowl, and it's just going to sit on there and grow algae. Right, so venting again, there's lots of different end wall options. And I love building end walls because it's like every one we build is a little bit different. So here's one that's an example. This is a picture from Lewis Jett, who was at Missouri and is now West Virginia. But this is basically just the garage door that they put on there where they're opening it up. I know some of the farmers out here have end walls that you can just take off, or that just take. Is anyone just taking off your end walls in the summer? Got one. Okay, so there's not a lot of people by us that are doing that. They're more doing kind of big, if they're going to do that, they're doing big openings like this. But a lot of people tend to just do the vent up top and then let the roll-ups and the vent work. We're going to try on the one we're building at home, we're going to try some big 4x8 removable kind of square or rectangles and see if we can pop those out and pop them back in. But there's lots of different options. This is really getting lots of airflow. One of the farmers I know that does open his end really big, he's got like a, I don't think I have a picture now. He's got like a can style door like you have on storage units. And with that one, he's had deer walk right into his tunnel. So he found a fawn headed down in the cherry tomatoes last spring. And, so that's something to think about if you have lots of deer pressure, which I'm guessing a lot of you do here like we do in Michigan. But it's lots of airflow. Lots of airflow means less humidity, means less disease pressure. So here's some ridge vents. Earlier said if it's $3,500 for a ridge vent, it's probably not worth it, right? So those would be more the ones that were not this style, but where they actually come over and then there's a whole piece that's mechanized or geared to do that. Those are usually expensive. This is an iron law house that I really like. This style ridge vent, if you're going to do a ridge vent, I don't think it's absolutely necessary. But Zimmerman and Four Season Tools and Iron do this style, where this basically, you can see it here, this is a crank coming down, and that right there, that area is just a roll up, right? So and you can automate those too, and then this whole space is open when you crank that up. So it's and that's this is a much more affordable ridge vent option. Again, I don't know that ridge vents we get really hot in Michigan and really humid in the summer. We have seen the need for ridge vents for vegetable production. Clearly for floriculture, when you're looking to purge lots of hot air really quickly, it makes sense. But I think if we were going to do a ridge vent, I would look at more at this option than the geared option. Anyone have ridge vents? No? All right. So you're similar to what most of our vegetable producers are doing. All right, bed layout. So lots of different ways to lay out beds, right? All of them useful and good and reasons for doing it, right? So here's one where it's the center aisle and they're going out to each side, right? So what we said earlier is this is your best, nicest, warmest place, right? So what you might want to do is raise the house up and move those out. So that's one option, right? Another option, here's our tunnel at home. Is we do our aisleways on the edge. They're about 2-foot walkways, and then we go across. They're 3-foot beds, 1-foot walkway, 3-foot bed, 1-foot walkway. So in that 4-foot bow spacing, what you end up with is we center the beds on those bows, and then you have your 1-foot walkway. So there's lots of reasons why we do this. Does this look really weird to you guys? Yeah, everyone's end to end. So the reason that we do it like this, and again, we work with lots of farmers who do it end-to-end. At the student farm, we have end-to-end. We have them crossways. I think both of them are great. So the reason we do it this way is a couple things. One, it helps me to keep track of where the beds, what was in each bed, so that I don't have, if I've got 7 long beds, and I've got lots of different crops in there, then it becomes like, okay, for rotation, was lettuce in foot 1 to 30, or was it in foot, 10 to 40? And again, I don't think that's anything that you can't get around. You just gotta write it down. So that's one reason. The kind of 2 bigger reasons are airflow, which we just talked a lot about, right, for humidity, right? So if we have beds going this way and we're using roll-up sides to blow across, when crops are small or short, or the warm, cool season crops, it doesn't matter, right? They're not tall, right? But when we talk about having tomatoes going end to end, and again, it works fine with lots of farmers who run them end to end. But what we have then is basically, if we have 7 rows going across here, we have a wind break every time, right? So that first row is getting lots of air moving through it. That end row is getting less air. Well, if the wind's coming from the south, it's getting less airflow through it. So it's kind of, it's not causing more disease. I don't want it to sound like that at all. But it's decreasing the amount of airflow, which has the potential to increase the amount of disease pressure, especially molds. Especially, it's wonderful, stick your hand in there and come out with a nice juicy smash. So that's one reason. The other 2 other reasons we do it have to do with warm season crops also. One is when we center, we have trusses on every bow. So when we center them on the bows, what we have is a built-in truss on every bed, no matter where the tomatoes are at that time or where the cucumbers are. Right, we already have it built in truss. We paid for that piece. Like if we can not have to pay to put another run of steel end to end that we can string up to, then let's do that. And what we do, because we know we're going to put weight on that, is when we build, instead of having our truss straight across, we just knock those struts or the pieces, the horizontals from the trusses in that way, and what it does is just bows it up a little bit. So then when we put all that weight from cucumbers or tomatoes on it, when it pulls back more to level instead of starting at level and pulling to negative, which isn't good for our structure. And then the other last final reason is, all of our fruit trees in Michigan run north-south, right? And the reason is that for fruit trees, most, especially apples, that light helps those crops, right? It really helps develop that nice blush on them, cherries too. So what we have, if our houses are running east-west and our rows are running north-south, what happens is the sun comes up, right? If we're this way, we're getting light only on one side of the plant all day long. But if we're this way, what happens is we get light on this side of the plant, and then we also get light on this side of the plant. So again, I'm not saying that you should go home and change your bed layout by any means. This is what's worked for us, and those are the reasons behind why we've done it. Right? This is probably looks like more familiar, right? So here's lots of head lettuce in, running end to end. Again, bed layout end to end, I think is a great option. They did a really good job of space use efficiency. They've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then a little walkway, 8, little walkway, right? So the end, the end lesson of this is we're trying to use the most space that we can, right? And we pay for that space to cover it. We clearly, in some cases we need to have walkways. I'm really interested, is anyone doing like a whole house of carrots and not having any for winter and not having any walkways so that you just start harvesting at the front and move all the way back? Is there anyone? I really want to, we might rent one from a friend, and I really want to do that next year, because I feel like then you're using if you're 2,880 square feet, you're using like a lot of that space, and it's like you pay for that space, let's figure out how to use it. I know someone was doing some salad mix, but with the cut and come again stuff, what he figured out is like he's walking all over this stuff that he has already cut to get to the next stuff. But I think like the single harvest stuff, like carrots or head lettuce or stuff, especially going into the winter or fall winter, that can be a really good use of the space there and trying to maximize as much as we can use. But just doing real simple, equations like I have this many beds and they're this size, and my tunnel is this many square feet. Like, let's figure out how much space efficiency we are using. Is it 63, 66, 62, 80? And at the same time, the beds have to be usable, right? You could say, like, as Steve Moore had some 5-foot wide beds those of you who know Steve Moore is probably like the only farmer I know that can actually step over a 5-foot bed or like reach to the middle of a 5-foot bed, right? So for us, you know, that 3-foot width has been really useful. We have some 40-inch ones at the student farm, and I would say that, you know, for people, I think I'm pretty standard height and build, that reaching to the middle of that is a pretty, you know, 20 inches in from each side, you know, 1.5 feet in from each side is pretty comfortable without, you know, 10 years from now being a hunchback. So again, it's just, there's lots of different layouts, but just think about how we're using that. Get a quick time check. We're good, 5 to 11, all right? So irrigation, right? So lots of different irrigation options, right? So here's one where, this is, I think, are a lot of people using overhead spinners? Anyone using? Seen some? So, right, so what we have is something that looks like that, right? So these spinners where the header is up top and it drops down and spins all around and spreads it out. You can adjust them by different nozzles, different pressure, different, you know, kind of interchangeable pieces for how far that you want that to spread, right? So if you're 4 feet from the edge, well, you don't want it to spray 8 feet, right? So you adjust it so that it's 4 feet, or you move that over so that it's 8 feet. There's not a lot of people in Michigan doing this. This is actually one of the farms we work with in Michigan. The main reason is that we have really, 2 things. One, we have really high alkalinity in our water, lots of dissolved bicarbonate because we have all limestone aquifers under the Great Lakes. So we tend to get a lot of clogging over time of really small holes. The other reason is that our wells have really, really high iron. And what happens is, I used to have a picture of it and I can't find it. They've changed the house now that was at the horticulture farm, but basically the plastic was just stained orange because over time of that water hitting it. And it doesn't do anything to the plastic, but what we're doing is decreasing our light dramatically. So there's not a lot of people doing this in Michigan. There are a few. This is Jimmy and Marcy have a really nice, beautiful, clean, really low iron water. So they can do it and not worry about staining it. Right, so here's another option. Who likes dragging hoses? Dragging hoses is fun, right? So this is something at the student farm that the header is up top. And what it is these hoses are coming down then, and they're every, so there's 2 beds, a hose, 2 beds. 2 beds, a hose, 2 beds. So at the front there's 2 beds, and then there's 4 beds between them, and then at the other end there's 2 beds on the edge. And you can water pretty comfortably, you know, 2 beds in each direction, and we don't have to drag any hoses. It's really nice. There's quick connects on the end of all these, although if you're farmers like our farm, the quick connects tend to somehow disappear, and especially if they're like the nice brass ones. You know, so, but it's really nice to have it where you can just take a wand and, you know, you're plugging it in, you aren't dragging hoses on the ground, aren't dragging them over seedlings that you don't want to, you know, drag them over, aren't running back and forth, aren't kind of, you know, the kind of snake charmer trainer where you got it all wrapped around here and around your neck. And so that's a really nice, I like this setup. It costs a little bit of money to do, a little bit of time to set up, but it works well. And then there's a drain down at this end, and it's pitched a little bit this way so that in the winter when we water, we can drain that water out so that it doesn't crack. So there's, I didn't realize this, but there's a picture of a thermostat right there. So that gives you, from the question earlier of kind of, you know, the height that it's at. This is at about, well, the space for hip board's at about 50 inches, I would say, so it's a little bit higher than that. So drip, you know, clearly lots of people are using drip. That's mostly what we use. On anything that's transplanted, we're using drip. Some stuff that's direct seeded we are. When our beds run the short distance, right, we're just running a header down here, and then we're running 2 out for each bed. For things that are direct seeded, we're still watering with a wand and you know, dragging hoses and that kind of thing. Especially for things like salad mix or carrots, where they're in there at that, like, you know, 2.5-inch spacing. And it's like, you know, sometimes I say, well, if you've got 12 rows per bed, it's like, well, sure, you can put some drip down and it works, but it's like, I think about that drip is taking out 2 of those rows, clearly, so that's, you know, maybe for 1 bed, that's one thing, but when you start multiplying that times 20 or 22 or 24 beds, you start to lose a lot of rows of production.
Do you need water in the winter? winter?
Sure.
So do you have to set it up for freezing temps?
Yeah, so there's a question, do we need water in the winter? Let's handle that real quickly. Let's finish talking about drip real quick. And then if you're running the length, which is probably most of you, you run the header. You know, if you have long beds with less number of them, you're running the header and running, you know, that drip that way. So that's what we do again for most of the direct seeded stuff, for most of the transplant stuff. Direct seeded, we are watering mostly by hand. The other thing is, if you've got that 3-foot bed and you've got 12 rows, that really tight spacing, what happens is by the time those end beds or the edges of the bed are really wet or wet enough, the middle where those drip lines are tends to be too wet for us at least. So I didn't plant her, I promise. That was just a really nice segue into what to do next. So here we sit at home. Right, so we do water in the winter. We put in frost-free hydrants, which for us means our frost line, they say, is 42 inches. We just put it down 48. So here we're trenching with a ride-on trencher. It's always good to have neighbors that come over that when you start machinery up, they always tend to come over, what are you doing? Then you can get them to kind of dig the rocks out or refill the trench or anything like that. So we do put down, 4 feet and then use a frost-free hydrant. We tend to use the 7-foot hydrants. This is a 6-foot hydrant, and I feel like it's a little bit low. So if it's 4 feet down, it's 2 feet out of the ground. I like the 3 feet out of the ground more. When you screw on things and take them off, it helps. So when we water in the winter, we're usually watering. The student farm waters a lot, like every 7 to 10 days, and I think it's because we have paid student employees, which we do pay. It's not free labor, which is a common misconception there, but we need something for them to do. So I think we water more for that. You can be like, hey, go water these 7 houses. That keeps some people busy for a little while. At home, I would say we're more in that, like, depending on how sunny it is, 3 to 4, once every 3 to 4 weeks. I think the bigger key is going into the fall and out of the fall into the winter with enough soil moisture built up that it can help to carry you. Right? Once it dries, you guys know, once soil dries out, it's really hard to get it wet again, especially if you have really high organic matter from putting in a lot of compost in the tunnels that we do. If that dries out and it's only getting 50 degrees and getting, you don't want to go into the night with freezing temperatures with a really wet bed. So you get in this kind of stuck place of like, you need to put on more water if you don't go in with enough moisture. But then you don't want it to be, really wet when it gets cold at night. So we do, again, probably once every 3 to 4 weeks. A lot of it is spot watering too, right? Parts of the beds might dry out. You're going and we're using a wanded breaker, and just sometimes we're doing all of it, but a lot of times it's going in and looking where those dry spots are, and then going ahead and watering those ones.